Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast, and now more than ever, independent media needs the support of listeners and viewers. Go to the website aroundtheempire.com to find out how to support us, gain access to bonus content, and more. Our guest today is Peter Lee. We discuss two of Peter's recent China Threat Report episodes titled Death by Oil, U.S. Warplanning in the Pacific, and the other one is titled The Escalation Solution, and we put a focus on Taiwan. In a bonus segment, we talk about the escalation in Ukraine, timely catastrophes, and why Peter now considers himself a catastrophist. Peter Lee has decades of experience in East Asia as both a businessman and a writer. He produces Peter Lee's China Threat Report, and he's been published at Asia Times, Counterpunch, and his own blog, China Matters. We recorded this on May 6th, 2022. Peter Lee is here speaking to us from California. Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's great to see you again.
And Joanne, it's great to be back.
So, Mr. 25%, as I was mentioning to you earlier, you always, not always, okay, I have to be fair. You don't always scare me with these China threat posts on your Patreon, but lately you have been. And okay, it's not your fault. It's their fault for the things that are going on. But the two recent ones, one titled, just for the listeners, these are the two that I am referring to. One is called Death by Oil, U.S. Warplanning in the Pacific, and the other is called The Escalation Solution. And, you know, it is mainly about Taiwan and China, but it takes into the larger geopolitical crazy stuff that's going on. And this, I don't know, it just seems to me like a steady path to war. And not only with China, obviously we can see what's going on in Ukraine with Russia. But I thought maybe we'd start with the death by oil, because the escalation solution is a little bit broader in scope. Whereas, well, first of all, let me just ask you if you have any opening comments about what's going on right now. Maybe something you want to say before we get into talking about these posts.
Well, I ended one of those posts saying this is why I'm a pessimist, and I'm still a pessimist. Things aren't going very, very well for the peaceniks of this world. And I think the problems of, the U.S. wanting to get the upper hand against Russia and China are also compounded by the fact that we're going into an election. And I think that the United States, I think Zelensky would be thinking about peace deal about right now with the Ukrainian forces getting hammered in the east. But I read a report that Boris Johnson was sent there to say no compromise with Putin, and that means that the United States and the EU, for reasons that seem inconceivable to me, are funneling tens of billions of dollars into Ukraine. And in fact, the expenditure there is reaching the levels that are equivalent to the Russian military budget, the total Russian military budget. And, I think that one reason is that, the political minds that rule in Washington have decided that they want Biden running against Putin and the Democrats running against Russia in the midterms. And I think it's the usual short-sighted crap, and hopefully it wouldn't come back to haunt the world much worse than it will, which I actually I worry less about, conflict in Europe than I do about famine, the disruption of food exports and fertilizer exports and those things. It's going to be a real mess. And I think that maybe by the end of the year, people will be saying, wow, we should have wound this war down in the spring when we still had time to prevent this catastrophe. But, we're not going to get that chance.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I don't think Russia has any, is eager to get to the peace table either, because they seem to have a certain agenda that they want to complete in terms of territory they want to occupy, things like that. So it's double trouble as far as I can see.
Yeah, well, in the absence of a political settlement, yeah, they have to rack up their gains on the battlefield instead of at the negotiating table. So yeah, they're going to be pushing forward, and I guess they'll be trying to do a defensible perimeter around, around eastern Ukraine. I saw today that Ned Price said that to refute the reports that our weapons were exhaustible, he said our supplies are inexhaustible, which
He
has,
did.
yes, he did. So we're gonna keep the pot boiling there for a few more months, at least up to the midterms.
I haven't heard anything about. I've heard rumors that Russia has their military industrial complex, running 3 shifts 24/7. But I don't know. I haven't heard anything specific about our factories running overtime. Have you?
Yeah, there's been some talk about supply chain problems, and the Taiwanese complained that they weren't getting their Stingers on time because they're all going to Ukraine, and about 1/3 of U.S. inventories of Stingers and Javelins, I think it was, has been exhausted. So that's why I think Ned Price at the State Department was coming out with that statement, to keep the allies from going wobbly and saying, maybe we should dial this thing back. No, we got enough arms to keep this going forever. This is his statement.
Yeah, there has been some chatter lately about, well, what if we need these weapons for a war or defense war or something? Are we going to end up with like our armories are all empty? Or
Well,
that seems a little hard to
yeah,
spend
crazy.
$1 trillion a year, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, but I don't know whether that really goes into weapons or soldiers. They don't seem to get much of it, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, the United States is not really equipped to fight a two-front war against two, as we call them, peer competitors or peer adversaries, Russia and China. That's why they're trying to keep trying to warn the Chinese not to make a move on Taiwan while we continue with our adventure in Ukraine.
Yeah. And I was just going back over some things where it was back in the end of January, like the last couple of days of January, in fact, where it's in South China Morning Post. Uh, Help me with his name. Hold on a second. Is it Xingang, the ambassador to the U.S.?
Well, there's a
QIN. Oh wait,
yeah,
Qingang, I guess.
yeah, Qingang. He's the new guy. Yeah,
Okay.
nice guy, sent here to do nice things.
Who wants that job, right?
Right. Yeah.
So he said the if the Taiwanese authorities, emboldened by the United States, keep going down the road for independence, it most likely will involve China and the United States, the two big countries in the military conflict. And then he says, speaking of Ukraine, he says, the people of Taiwan and China are compatriots and don't want to fight. But because Taiwan is working down the road toward independence, China will not commit to giving up the unpeaceful means for reunification, because this is a deterrent, which is a real word salad there, but
Mhm.
I get his point.
Yeah.
But, the parallels, I know that you have drawn parallels between the war, invasion of Ukraine, and the potential war between China and, well, I don't know what you call it, China liberating, is that what they would say? Liberating, reuniting, they would probably
Reuniting
say.
with the motherland. Yeah.
Reuniting Taiwan. They're saying, they're compatriots, they don't want to fight, but, we have to invade, which sounds a little familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyway, let me go back to those two posts. Let's talk about, he says, hey, there's going to be a war. If the U.S. continues to help Taiwan walk down that path toward independence, which apparently even sending, who went over there? Was it my senator or
Yeah, I think it was your senator there. Nancy
Menendez,
Pelosi
man?
was supposed to go until she got COVID. Uh, so yeah, they just I can't remember the names of them, but there was a congressional delegation that went on, and
Yeah.
also another one from the youth wing of the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan.
And
So these
any
also,
time that any American representatives go to Taiwan, that's uh, that enrages the Chinese, right? Because you're not supposed to address them individually because they're just a state within China, right? Is that pretty much the framing the way it's supposed to be?
yeah, that's the norm that they're trying to establish. As part of their overall strategy to isolate Taiwan. In the international community.
So it just bubbled over again because of that congressional delegation that went to Taiwan, and I mean clearly, I don't know, the whole thing with Taiwan is kind of ridiculous. Anyway, we pretend we don't have any troops there, and then we do have troops there, and we signed something that said that we will honor the one China policy, but clearly we're not. And I guess China looks the other way for some of it, and some of them they don't. I guess the big obvious things like visitors going there
Mm-hmm.
as a delegation are more obviously embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that this independence thing. I mean, I guess the risk of a war of China moving on Taiwan seemed a little bit remote, but now not all of a sudden, but now seems even likely. What do you have a latest percentage of what you guys you were laying some odds? We were I don't want to put that
Yeah.
kind of.
Well, basically, my take is that the Chinese have always found that they felt that. Excuse me, scratch my nose. Cut that out. Okay, the Chinese have always felt that time is on their side, as their military and their economy and their GDP strengthen. It will become harder and harder for Taiwan to resist, some sort of accommodation with the mainland. And the United States runs the equation exactly from the other side. As China strengthens, then that makes it more of an existential issue to try to force a conflict before China is completely ready for it. So, the United States has been pursuing a policy of, decoupling and, heightening military confrontations, selling arms, so on and so forth. And they have been able to rely on the fact that the Chinese always, get their backs up and talk about reuniting the country when, the United States pulls these things. So, but I think that my thesis has always been that Taiwan is a means to an end for the People's Republic of China, which is to say that they will move against Taiwan only when they feel that they can prevail against the United States in the Western Pacific and force the United States to back off and allow China to assume a dominant role inside the notorious First Island chain. And conditions certainly are not there right now.
I heard somebody say that China basically came out and said we could be more ready, but we will take it on right now if we have to.
If we have to, yeah.
Did they say something like that?
Now, they've always said something like that. They haven't said we're not ready. They always say we're ready.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we're ready. We can do it. And the most provocative thing that the United States did recently was that Admiral Davidson floated the idea of putting intermediate range ballistic missiles, or IRBMs, on Taiwan in order to threaten the mainland and negate the big missile advantage that the PRC has in the Taiwan Straits. So there's always stuff like this popping out there, and it's just a question of when will the Chinese decide to take the bait, and make a move. And right now the situation is not great for the Chinese. The Japanese are pretty much lined up with the United States, and because they, quite frankly, hate the Chinese. It's I'd say that the place with the biggest negative perception of China in the world is Japan. And also you got a right winger and pro-US guy coming in South Korea. And you got the European Union, basically because of Ukraine, forced into an alignment with the United States. And now they're talking about NATO defending Taiwan. So from the Chinese point of view, don't spit into the wind. Do not try to force the issue now if you can avoid it. But if the United States, for instance, were to push the issue, by announcing they're going to put IRBMs on Taiwan, then the Chinese would push it.
So that would do it.
I think that would do it. Yeah, those are. Yeah. See, the thing is that the United States still honors the Chinese, the three Chinese communiques, which have a ton of loopholes in them. But the one thing is that they said they would only sell defensive weapons to the Taiwanese, and they've tried to push the envelope with, like deterrence. We attack the Chinese mainland, but it's deterrence. That's a kind of defense. But IRBMs, I think, would pretty much step over the line, and the Chinese would think about plastering Taiwan with everything they got.
So the distance between China and Taiwan is about 100 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always forget. And obviously the range of missiles that we're talking about would cover that distance and some.
And more. Yeah. They'd go everywhere. I mean, I can't remember, intermediate range ballistic missile, I think it's like 5,000 miles or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, we're basically talking about putting the entire, most of the Chinese mainland under risks. So, that
3,000 to 5,500 kilometers. Okay, so 1,800 to 3,400 miles. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, all the good stuff would be in range.
Yeah. Okay. There's something else I was going to ask you now. I cannot remember.
Nuclear tipped. They could be nuclear tipped. That's the other.
So let's dive into this death by oil, war planning in the Pacific, because, I always heard people saying navies are obsolete, aircraft carriers, any big ships, sitting ducks because missiles and because bombs, right? But you went to great lengths to, and I'll shut up and let you talk about it in a minute, but you made me see why there's another reason why any war between the United States and China is likely to go nuclear. Lawrence Wilkerson talks about this all the time, about the war games that he has conducted over the years, which, I guess I think those things must age over time, right? A war game that you conducted 20 or 30 years ago, I'm not quite so sure how much the outcomes are relevant now, depending on how much has changed. But in those cases, it was something like, we can't win a ground war in China. China can't win a naval war. And so therefore it's going to go to a nuclear war. But I'm starting to change some of my thoughts on that because of the things that you laid out in this death by oil post. Do you want to lay the groundwork for that one, or do you want me to ask you specific questions?
Ask me specific questions.
So basically, Peter took the time to go back and talk about what it took to fuel and what it costs, but uh, what it takes to fuel a navy, basically. And then going back to the, my God, it sounds like hell of when they ran naval ships by coal. Can you even imagine what that life was like? So, and then they had to, keep supplies of coal floating to these ships, and it's just crazy. So the British basically set up all kinds of stations, and okay, think about the Pacific. The Pacific is a ridiculously big ocean, and but the British managed to set up these stations along the way where they could get some coal, and they could keep those ships going. And then, of course, um, oil came along, and now our ships are fueled by oil. If they're not shipped by nuclear, that's a whole different thing. But even so okay, you don't have this hellish coal situation, but they still take enormous amounts of fuel. It takes it more than you could ever store. So you're always going to have these way stations along the way. And in order to even to just be able to travel around to sail through the Taiwan Strait and all that stuff. Um, and we have Japan, and we had, you mentioned the is it Red Hill in Pearl
Yeah.
Harbor,
Mhm.
which is a giant fuel storage area, which was leaking
Mhm.
into the aquifer, which is I think they may have just won that battle of Red Hill. They may be
Well, the
shutting it
U.S. has,
down.
basically admitted it finally. I remember I took in my vacation in Hawaii. I took the Gray Line tour bus there, and it was interesting. It was a native Hawaiian gentleman who was driving the bus, and aside from bitching on the United States nonstop through there, the big thing he talked about, and this was 8 years ago, was how these tanks were leaking into the local water supply. So everybody knew, in the United States was denying it, but then guess what? The leakage showed up in the wells of Hickam Air Force Base and the U.S. personnel. So they had to. Now they've admitted there's something that's supposed to take $10 billion to fix, or something like that. And meanwhile, they're building alternate fuel depots in places like Australia and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then we're talking about millions of gallons is the amount of stuff that. Do, do you remember off the top of your head how much fuel it takes to run some of these things? I can
Well,
look it up in your article.
yeah, you can look it up. I think in this basically in the Seventh Fleet, the Seventh Fleet, when it's operating, needs basically a replenishment tanker's worth of fuel every day. You know, and I think that was 165 million barrels or something like that. 165,000 barrels. I
Yeah.
cannot.
Yeah.
165,000 barrels. So yeah, these ships have to be shuttling out from Singapore and wherever, and getting out there to the Seventh Fleet and delivering the juice and that sort of stuff. So it's a major logistic enterprise. The and all of that's going to be at risk, in
Yeah.
a China war. But the main purpose of this stuff is these fleets, I think, is to try to cut off China's oil supply, which is something I haven't gotten around to writing that piece yet. I wrote several pieces on it several years ago, but the whole reason that we care about the South China Sea is that the only country that is reliant on the South China Sea to get its stuff is China. I just
And
thought that was
is this oil and gas reserves in that disputed area between Philippines and I
yeah,
don't know.
there's
I
some
never looked
stuff
at it.
out there, but that's not important. The
Not
main thing,
that. Oh, their
yeah,
supply. You mean their supply?
that stuff will take 10 years to develop. But actually, the people who really care about that is the Philippines, because the national budget is balanced by gas revenues from this field that's getting exhausted. And meanwhile, the Chinese have been putting the screws on the Philippines by refusing to allow them to unilaterally develop Reed Bank, which is where the new money tree is supposed to be. But now the Chinese get most of their oil and gas either from the Middle East or from
So you're talking about the tankers coming in.
tankers coming in, biggest tankers in the world. They go through the South China Sea to get to South China, and the Seventh Fleet fools around in the South China Sea to threaten, be able to realistically threaten cutting off those supplies.
Right. So the thing that you pointed out here, which was because I always thought, okay, so these if the Navy is so important for any war with China, which I assume it is, then if you cripple the Navy, or if you even just make things a little bit more difficult, it seems like game over, right? But so if navies are obsolete, and I've heard actually even naval people, which I mean, this is taboo. You're not allowed to say this, right? For the their reason for existence, right? Their raison d'être. So the um, I always wonder. All right, so yeah, these things are sitting ducks now, but would they actually do it? Would they actually sink an aircraft carrier? Would they actually sink even some lesser
Yeah.
ship? But they don't have to. They can cripple them in other ways, which I had not thought about, which is to just go and pick off all of these
Little tankers.
depots and these, all
Yeah.
these sort of little gas stations
Yeah.
in the Pacific.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's
if I were China, boy, I would have that all set up to go, wouldn't you?
yeah. Well, yeah. Basically one reason that our China policy is pretty much shaped by the fact that the Navy runs Indo-PACOM or Indo-PACOM, which is our half the world thing run out of Hawaii. It's always been run by an admiral, and because it's a big wet place out there. But and also the other factor is that we do not have a lot of good bases out there. We got Okinawa, and we got all that stuff up in Japan, but the Philippines kicked out the United States, and nobody else except the Australians, several thousand miles away, have shown any eagerness to have U.S. bases in there. Not Indonesia, not Malaysia. Thailand is basically being co-opted. They balance between us and and China. So basically, to project power, do all those good things. Instead of having islands and bases, we got aircraft carriers and ships. It's not ideal at all. And one of the interesting takeaways that I gleaned from Twitter was that the assertion that the Russians have skimped on their surface fleet because they realize the real game is subs.
Wait, they skimped on their surface
Surface
fleet?
fleet, yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
That's why it's crappy ships that get sunk, by little missiles, But and they haven't invested in them the same way they've invested in these immense strategic subs and hunter-killer subs and that sort of stuff. And that's what I think the United States should be worrying about. Now that they've pushed Russia pretty much into the arms of China, is the idea that Russian submarine technology and maybe equipment will become accessible to China for messing with the U.S. fleet. The Chinese do not have a lot of sub game. They got some, but they don't have a large fleet, and the United States spends hundreds of millions of dollars figuring out where they are and characterizing their engine sounds and where their little hidey holes and stuff like that. So I don't think the Chinese have a lot of confidence that they would be able to, operate freely. The Japanese, even the Philippine military and the Taiwanese military and the United States military all work together on anti-submarine warfare. And so I think that the philosophy is that that the Chinese are not yet strong enough in that area to mount a serious threat against the surface fleet. Still missiles flying out from mainland China.
I don't remember who said it, but I believe there was also another threat that China and Russia might have to form a real military alliance. I think it was a comment related to the war in Ukraine. I think that it's silly to think that they don't have a military alliance, but they don't have an official one yet. But I think that threat was actually made, and
Yeah.
if that, and I mean, they're doing exercises together and things
Yeah,
like that.
I
So.
haven't heard of a real I guess an effective military alliance would involve a mutual security treaty. You're attacked, I attack, that sort of thing. I don't think that's in the cards, because the level of trust between Russia and China is not that great that they're going to unconditionally agree to enter into war on others' behalf. And also the United States is furiously trying to keep China from overtly supporting or assisting the Russians in the Ukraine war, which I think is going to happen. As this thing drags on into the summer, it's a proxy war. It's now unambiguously a proxy war between the United States and Russia,
Yeah.
fought with the with the cooperation of the Ukrainians, and that's going to mean that the Chinese will give lip service on one side, but on the other side they're going to start providing financial or material type of assistance to the Russians, and vice versa. There'll be a
I
quid.
think that's probably already
Yeah.
happening in terms of propping up the currency anyway, or helping along with the sanctions.
Yeah. Hmm.
So they're already, what do you call it, a co-belligerent or something like that, if you consider the financial part
Yeah.
of it.
Hmm.
It's like supplying weapons or defensive weapons, like to define
Yeah. Or
supplying defensive weapons.
food, consumer goods, that sort of thing. Credit, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Russia has they have their SCO military alliance. I don't know if there is any guarantee that the different players in that members of that alliance will. It's not the SCO. Well, I
Shanghai
forget
cooperation.
that. Yeah, I got the wrong one.
Oh,
But
that's okay.
Russia
That
also
sounds
has
good.
military alliance, Belarus, and I think
Well,
they
that's
want to bring Kazakhstan. Yeah. So I don't know if they definitely guarantee that they'll intervene to defend each other, but I think it could be like a looser military alliance. But
yeah.
that's neither here nor there.
Well, actually, I think it is. I think in terms of trying to escalate the conflict and bring more resources to bear against Russia. I think there is a certain idea of let's attack Russia's allies and assets. On the basis that they're supporting Ukraine, so that way Russia is forced to defend them. There's this Moldova, Transnistria thing out
Yeah.
there. The Ukrainians were grunting about mounting an attack there, so that Putin would have to divert some resources to assist them and that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
then the other one would be, of course, attacks on Belarus and that sort of stuff. Right now, the conflict is reasonably contained. You've noticed that there's a huge naval base with two gigantic Russian subcarriers under construction in Crimea. And I think like that's sort of help. That's sort of like if you attack Kiev, we're going to blow up those two Mistral class helicopter carriers that are being constructed in Crimea. So, you
Not the
know,
same two ones
yeah,
that
that's those two.
to
Yeah.
do with the French and the
Yeah, the French didn't sell them. I can't remember what the Russians did that they didn't get them. But yeah, so the Russians kept the plans.
Egypt was involved.
Egypt. They went to Egypt instead, and there was some. I can't remember what the sanction was, but there was some dust up with the Russians, and so
Hmm.
the Mistrals had to go to Egypt instead. The Russians had the plans, and so they're building them themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's too hard to keep
yeah,
track of all this stuff, man. It's just
yeah. So, but
um
anyway, just to interject here, the situation in Ukraine is an interesting analog to the possible war fighting in the Taiwan Strait
yeah.
over Taiwan. Because again, the idea is to keep it contained. We're bleeding them. We're not conducting total war. And I think the United States, the United States idea is that if we start a war, it will not go nuclear. You know, it's just going to be a lot of shooting back and forth in the Taiwan Straits, and because they love freedom, the Taiwanese will get their asses kicked. Just like the Ukrainians are. And the idea is to keep it within the paint between the lines. Just we'll fight. We'll attack mainland China across from Taiwan. You will attack Taiwan from the mainland. We'll blow up anything that goes into the Taiwan Straits. But other than that, we're going to try and avoid escalation to a all-out China on America war, which would then, of course, involve Japanese getting attacked, and maybe the Australians even.
Hmm.
So containment So the Ukrainian war offers the Chinese a good preview of the kind of war gaming that the United States would like to see out there in the Taiwan Strait.
Huh.
Hmm. Yeah.
So expand on that for me. Who who wants a war that will be contained like that? What guarantee is there that it won't? Or you're just saying, just as an analogy, you think it might be more likely to happen because the Ukraine has not turned into a full European war. So,
Well, if it turns into a full European war, I think even the United States will be a little too occupied to, to pursue its
yeah,
other opportunities there. So that's probably another reason, why they're sort of trying to keep a lid on those things. A total war with Russia that involves attacks by Poland and all that sort of stuff. It's a rather big historical mess, and they would not be able to. And then, if I was China, I'd just say, okay, I'm going into Taiwan, man. Look at it; they're fighting World War III in Europe. Now's the time. Let's
yeah,
go, baby.
exactly.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have talked about that this would be the best time for China to make a move on Taiwan right now while
Yeah.
United States all tied up. But
That's why we got nukes. That's always my thing. That's I told you before the show that in at the end of January, when the balloon first went up over Ukraine, the United States made a big point of surfacing a strategic nuclear sub armed with nuclear tipped ICBMs in Guam. And these things never surface because they're supposed to be the silent service. They're hiding somewhere. You don't know where they are. But then the guy came out there, and the some admiral went down there and gave a speech where they're saying this is we're here to keep the peace, deter stuff. And so the ultimate sanction for the United States is always the idea that if things get out of hand, we can always drop a nuke on somebody. And the reemergence of nuclear coercion in Asia, I think, is the untold story of what's been happening over there. But the United States feeling is impunity. You know, let's say something happens. Maybe the Chinese eat a nuke, and in return they decide to nuke somebody in Japan, which is their main,
right.
which is a possibility. But would the Chinese ever nuke the American homeland? I think that's still considered to be off the board because of the massive retaliation capacity of the United States. And China only has a limited number of missiles that they can count on getting through U.S. missile defenses.
Are we sure of that?
No, nobody knows. Jeez. Now they got the hypersonic stuff and, the stuff that's orbiting the Earth and going zoom down to there. I think it's called FOBS or something like that. I can't remember what it's called. But, the Chinese announced that, because they know the United States is trying to push China into a nuclear war as limited war thing. The Chinese doctrine is mutually assured destruction. Nobody uses a nuke. United States war planners are obsessed with the idea that we can establish a framework where we get to nuke China and maybe somebody else in Asia gets nuked, but it never escalates past that point. That's called, they impute that to the Russians with the escalate to de-escalate thing. Escalate to a nuclear threat in order to de-escalate a conflict.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. That's one of my real.
I used to think about, taking shelter in Europe if things went bad between, the United States and China. But now with this thing, I'm thinking I got to start thinking of moving to Nigeria or something like that, in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a
just the
good place.
fact that there are people who think that you can incorporate nukes into some kind of a war plan, a limited
Mm-hmm.
amount. I mean, it's just
Yeah, well, you
that's
fence.
completely insane, right? I mean,
Well,
you're,
they proceed, I think, from the other end of the argument, which is to say we're losing our conventional edge. Therefore, we must use nukes. Now it becomes a question of how do we use nukes, but preventing a major, planet-wide escalation.
right. I don't see how anybody like I just don't see any possibility of being able to guarantee that.
Yeah, because the Chinese wouldn't guarantee it. That's their whole gig. They have a small nuclear force, and their basic thing is that they will never do first use. The United States, by the way, as we all know, has a first use doctrine, not so they can attack somebody with nuclear weapons if a vital U.S. interest is threatened. So we can attack first, and the Chinese thing is then you get the kitchen sink in return. They're not going to change that, because they don't have any interest in doing first use in their backyard, and blowing
Yeah.
up Asia, to take care of the Americans. So,
I mean, just on not to get too deep into this, but what does that mean for the Chinese to have a doctrine of no first use? It really doesn't mean anything.
well, it means that they're not going to. They will only fire nuclear weapons in retaliation for the first use of nuclear weapons by the United States.
Unless they change their mind about that tomorrow.
I guess you're true. I guess that's right. You can always say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just I've never put a lot of faith into those kinds of doctrines. And I think anybody who has nukes is eventually going to, well, at times going to think about that option.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think on the other hand, the United States would what's the word? They would not. They would retaliate and not commensurately. I can't remember what the term is, but it would not be tit for tat. It would be tit 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 for your tat, that kind of thing. And the United States has a lot of nukes. And also, we're introducing tactical nuclear weapons into the Pacific theater again with the Long Range Standoff, or LRSO, nuclear tipped cruise missile, which will be entering into service under a crash program in a few years. We'll have several hundred of those. And the Navy is also agitating to return nuclear tipped submarine launched cruise missiles to the Pacific. So plenty of tactical nukes out there. The Chinese have not displayed any tactical nukes yet. They just have the big bruisers, the big ICBM mounted missiles.
I was looking a little further into tactical nukes recently, and the word doesn't mean anything. It has no. There are no boundaries. I mean, everybody sort of has an idea of what it means. It means to use it in battle and not basically and not escalate into a giant war. A smaller than smaller than mega is pretty much all it means.
Yeah.
But it could mean anything. There's no official definition of it. But yeah, that term's been coming out an awful lot lately, hasn't it? Whether it is the U.S. and Russia going back and forth, they're going to use nukes. I know they're going to use nukes, and no, we're not, but they are, and really kind of crazy stuff. But
well, I think that the Russians have seriously dangled the possibility of a nuclear response if NATO, particularly Poland, comes into the war, or
intervenes, yeah.
Or somebody gets the idea of blockading or attacking Kaliningrad, which is that Russian enclave up there in the Baltic states. So I think he's serious about that. But again, I think the idea is to keep this within, we'll just continue to brutalize Ukraine. I do it from the east, you do it from the west, and everybody will keep this from escalating. So I think Putin was drawing a red line to say, don't bring NATO into this. Don't threaten Königsberg, and that was, and so he would talk seriously about lighting off a nuke against Poland because he hates them.
And and it's in return they do too. But the it's I can't think of the phrase. I'm not my sharpest today, but yeah, I mean, I don't have a side in this war, so I've been. Of course, every war has a blue team, red team, um, and they become zealots, or a lot of them do. But it's really something watching the zealous sides on either side of the pro Ukraine and the pro-Russian side on this because it's just not true. Like the pro-Russian side is saying, "Oh, Putin never threatened anything about nukes.
Hmm.
That's a lie. That's U.S. propaganda." That and I'm like, yeah, I remember there was really just a few weeks ago, and it has been over a couple of years. I understand why he's doing what he's doing, right? So I get it. But at first he's threatening Europe a lot. He's saying, this is going to be an all-out European war. Their greatest fear, right? They don't want another they don't want Europe to be wrecked again. They still living memory of many people. So that's the first thing, and I understand why he does that, right? He doesn't want Europe to become belligerent about all this, and that's kind of probably better for all of us. But that's over. That's happening now. Um, but it wasn't that long ago that he was sending out the message that if you intervene, what were the exact words? I don't remember. But let's put it this way: on Russian state media, I think it's Channel One, just a few days ago, they had a simulation, two simulations, in fact, of nuclear strikes on London and the UK. One was this, a 1600 radioactive tidal wave caused by some nuclear torpedo or whatever, submarine. And the other was their Satan missile striking the middle of London.
Those
You,
those UK simulations or those Russian simulations? I can't
they were
remember.
They were on Russian state TV, Channel One, and then they've got their bombast guy who actually put it into words too, was screaming and yelling about wiping the UK off the face of the map. Uh, with a 1,600-foot radioactive tidal wave. So, uh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Nothing more needs to be said. Anyway, we're already 45 minutes into this. I better switch over. Anything else in the Taiwan situation uh, interesting, relevant that you've noticed? I am don't keep I don't keep up with the details on that on a daily basis like I should and plan to.
Well,
Anything else interesting happening?
that war will probably be percolating in time for the 2024 elections. That's my prediction. So
Yeah,
basically, the Taiwanese government is basically positioned itself as the front lines of freedom. They're talking to the most hardline anti-Russian states, the Baltic states and Poland and the Czech Republic and those guys, and also the they're getting they're I think they're getting some more weapons recently as far as I can tell. I think Taiwan's kind of on the back burner now because we're kind of preoccupied with
yeah.
Ukraine, but it's going to come to the front burner pretty soon. They want to keep the momentum going, and basically the whole name of the game, as you've seen in Europe, is polarization. Push. You know, there's no fence sitters. I mean, that was the big story with Ukraine was that the United States was able to herd, particularly Germany, also to a certain extent France, into this overt anti-Russian thing when they were trying to, at least part of the government, Schultz and those guys, was trying to remain neutral. But now, the everybody's got to kiss ass to the hardliners. So I saw some weird speech where, Schultz gave his support Ukraine speech. He gave it in English, to make sure that there was no misunderstanding that he was towing the NATO line there. So it'll be the same thing over there. The Shinzo Abe has been agitating. You remember Shinzo Abe?
Yeah,
That guy, and he's the tutelary deity of the remilitarized Japan, and he's written op-eds in the LA Times and also been quoted on TV as saying that the United States needs to give an explicit security guarantee to defend Taiwan in the case of a Chinese attack. So, because I think the United States was thinking about doing that anyway. But the point is that from Japanese defense doctrine, they can't do anything unless the United States goes in first. You know. So with that doctrine, then there's this whole sort of piling on thing where if the United States says it's a strategic imperative, and Japan, because it's an ally, will support Taiwan, militarily, sending vessels and planes down there and doing whatever. So, things are getting reasonably hot over there in Taiwan.
Does Abe generally speak out like this or exercise influence like this?
Yeah,
I haven't heard much about him lately. But.
Oh, that's okay. He's been stirring shit. Sorry. Um, actually, the whole, the Quad,
yeah,
that whole thing. Actually, Abe and Dick Cheney first floated the Quad back during the George, I think it was in 2005 or 2006, and so he's always been agitating for a overt anti-China alliance, and he does that, playing the refs in the United States and in India, and to a certain extent in Australia. Yeah, so he's a very active guy.
Speaking of, sorry.
His main thing is, finding loopholes in the so-called peace constitution that will allow the Japan to engage in military activities, outside its territorial airspace and waters. And the current prime minister, also from the LDP, I think his foreign secretary, I think it was Sato, was talking about putting intermediate range ballistic missiles on Hokkaido, for stuff, Korean stuff, Russian stuff, Chinese stuff.
Yeah.
So the whole trajectory of Japanese foreign policy has been what they call making Japan a normal country, which means a country that's heavily run and will fight a war somewhere.
I meant to ask you about the Quad, or no, AUKUS. Wait, Quad. The one that India's in. The one that India is in. Given the things that have been happening with India and their relationship with Russia lately, how's the Quad? Have you heard anything? Is it shaky? Is India still all in? Are there factions like the Indian military has one stance and the politicians have another, like happens in some countries? Or it seems like the Quad's going to be a little shaky.
I think so too. Yeah, India has not been a full-throated ally of the West in the whole Ukraine thing, and that's been noticed. But the idea is that India is just so important to serve as an anti-China counterweight that we're willing to overlook it. So the idea is that China and India will never be buddies, and so we should always keep the door open so that when things heat up, we can take advantage of the relationship. And the Indian military is strongly anti-China, and it has been my contention, unproven though, I will admit, that whenever relations between the cities in China and India get too close, the military is always there to foment a border incident, to crank the outrage machine and make sure that the threat from China is fully recognized. So it's interesting. On the one hand, Modi has been playing footsie with the Russians, not being a good boy in that thing. On the other hand, they just froze $750 million in funds from a Chinese phone company, Xiaomi, with the contention that they were doing some sort of forex fiddling. So he's playing both ends. He's a classic balancer, which the United States hates. But if you look at the experience in Europe, you can always hype up, you can always exacerbate a security crisis to push the fence sitters towards you. I think that's the United States philosophy.
A couple other things I jotted down. Is it easy to, when they talk about wolf warrior diplomacy, what is that?
That's just bitching about Chinese diplomats. I don't really take it seriously, but you can take it as an indication of the deterioration of U.S. PRC relations. The Chinese feel that they're getting serially screwed by the United States. With tariffs, sanctions, designations as a genocidaire and all that sort of stuff. So they got to push back. And just being polite and saying, "Oh, we're not genocidaires," isn't quite hacking it. And so, they send some guys out there to make some noise. The United States, I think, highlights this, because, it makes, non-Chinese look at these guys as uppity Chinese. How dare they? That sort of thing. I think it has a very little substantive impact. The real story of U.S.-China relations is they're bad. And this is just
Yeah.
a manifestation of it. And the Chinese, for their sense of their national dignity and something like that, they don't want to show their either domestic or international opinion that when you kick China in the butt, we'll just grin and say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" So the wolf warriors come out, and act angry.
Also, Bahamas. True that
Bahamas?
China. Yeah, I know this. These are two totally unrelated questions.
Okay.
Bahamas. True that China owns a huge amount of property and land in Bahamas. Have you heard that?
That totally, I never heard
Okay.
that. Okay,
I had
sorry.
never
I'll
heard
have
it
to.
before
Oh,
either. It was sort of a new thing to me. I'm going to dig into it a little more.
yeah, I'll dig into it too. It's
Because you would think that somebody would be making a pretty big fuss about that. It's like 50 miles away, right? From some
oh
parts of
yeah.
Florida. Yeah.
Well, we just we got all up our backs up because there was a talk that the Chinese might put a base in West Africa, and threaten the precious homeland from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while we were talking, I just looked at some headlines, and which I should have done before we started talking. But I see a headline in Al Jazeera saying China makes second largest incursion into Taiwan air defense zone. Al
Ah,
Arabia, Taiwan jet scramble as China Air Force enters air defense zone. Um, another one of those things. I think last time we talked may have been soon after China had sent a specific number of jets. And remember all that?
yeah.
Yeah. Let me
Well,
just.
do you want to hear the whole why the air defense identification zone thing is bullshit? You want to hear that again? Uh, well,
Let's
anyway,
just
so
see.
the
Well,
air.
let's just see what happened here, unless you already pulled it up and read it. But it
Yeah,
says 18 aircraft, including fighters and bombers, entered Taiwan's air defense zone. And yeah, go back to our previous podcast if you want to know what that means.
yeah.
Prompting the scrambling of jets. China sent 18 warplanes, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah.
Um, Second largest incursion.
Yeah, it's not an incursion. Basically,
Yeah.
the air defense identification zone is a unilaterally declared area outside of domestic airspace where they want people to identify themselves. The Chinese announced a new air defense zone over the East China Sea a few years ago. The United States ignored it, instructed everybody else to ignore it too, including commercial airlines. So the key thing to look for in our World War III planning is not if they're flying planes into the air defense identification zone. The key thing, the next step in escalation, is if they fly over the median line, which is the line that goes down the Taiwan Strait, 50 miles out, 55 miles from here,
Okay.
55 miles from there. It's not an international boundary, but the United States has gone to define that as a de facto border, between the two. And, the Chinese sort of go up to it, but they don't go over it, And when they decide to go over it, that's a big deal. The next big deal is if they actually overfly Taiwanese landmass, You know, that's the next big thing. You know, if the United States does something that China really doesn't like with Taiwan, they're just going to send fighter jets buzzing the capital. You know, but you know when they go around the air defense zone, they're just sneaking around the south side of the island. You know, away from anything. It's pretty plain vanilla.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, somebody wants it to look like it's a big deal.
Well,
So,
you know, the Chinese like to do it now because the Taiwanese Air Force is not that great, and forcing them to scramble all the time is kind of wearing them out. But I assume this, I don't know, does it say in the article what it was response to? Was it the response to the visit of that congressional delegation or what?
let's see.
Yeah. Congress
China
critics.
described, there was no immediate comment from China's defense ministry. China has described previous incursions as missions to defend the country's sovereignty and counter Taiwan's collusion with foreign forces.
Ooh.
It looks like China has not said anything yet about why they did
Well,
it.
they never do, but I'm saying is that usually there's something in the article about how I know, I think it was, you know what I think it was? It was the visit of the LDP Youth Wing delegation, which is supposedly there to set the stage for
LDP, remind me?
Liberal Democratic Party of Japan.
Oh,
And the youth wing has always been a cadet squad for the big guys, and the idea is that delegation was there to set the stage for Shinzo Abe to visit Taiwan, to make a visit to Taiwan. So he's not a government official now, but highly influential. So basically, the kind of big news in Taiwan affairs last week was the visit of the LDP Youth Wing, which is considered to be a sort of training ground for future LDP leaders. And the rumor was that they were setting the stage for Shinzo Abe to personally visit Taiwan and talk up the whole Taiwan defense thing later in the year. So my speculation is that was the reason why the Chinese flew some bombers into the Adas.
I'm looking in, there's a paragraph down here at the bottom. It says Ukraine, the subtitle is Ukraine may be East Asia tomorrow. Taiwan lives under the constant threat of invasion by Beijing, which sees itself blah blah blah. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida warned on Thursday that the invasion of Ukraine could be replicated in East Asia if leading powers do not respond as one to Moscow's aggression, saying that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait must be maintained. Okay, so this is basically other countries not going along with
Yeah.
wanting to stay out of this and
Pretty
being,
much a universal,
yeah,
universal thought, I think, you know.
I think that's all they're doing
Okay.
here. Let's see. Taiwan's foreign ministry thanked Kishida for his comments on stability in the Taiwan Strait, saying they not only reflect the aspirations of okay, we know we've seen all this before.
Usual shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So, bonus question. Let me give me a second to get to that point in my notes, in your article. And so in your piece titled The Escalation Solution, you say, I am a catastrophist. And I'd like to hear more about that. And I just want to say that you put into words some of the things that I had been tossing around or had been really bothering me. I don't want to play that down, really bothering me, maybe even losing some sleep over, as to why we seem to be barreling toward this catastrophe. But if you would, tell us why you are a catastrophist. Visit aroundtheempire.com to find the various ways that you can gain access to the bonus content, join the Discord community, and participate in the periodic Zoom calls where we talk among ourselves. I hope that some of you will join us, and now we'll continue with the wrap-up. Anyway,
Anyway,
On that
cheery note.
happy note,
Yeah.
Peter, how do people follow you, follow your work? How do they support you?
Okay, well, I do have a Patreon, which I presciently called Peter Lee's China Threat Report. And, I had to get some of that threat cheddar. I saw it was out there and, I decided to name my thing China Threat Report. So Peter Lee's China Threat Report on Patreon welcomes new subscribers. And also, I'm more active than I like to be on Twitter. My handle is China Hand. And I used to have a blog called China Matters, which is now an archive. But you're welcome to visit it since it's all
Still
free.
very relevant, though.
Yeah,
Still,
I mine that thing all the time. I gotta tell you.
yeah,
Yeah, but it's a funny world. I think the real threat to the world now is our climactic and economic, and the idea that we're taking a time out, from solving those problems to fight a war with Russia for 2 years. To me, seems incredible. Do you see that thing about those temperatures in India, by the way?
no, what?
123 degrees in India yesterday. You know? Yeah.
Hmm.
People dying on trains of heat prostration, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So, and that crazy weather we get in, I'm sort of cutting into your time here. That crazy weather we're getting in New Jersey, it's because the jet stream keeps oscillating. It used to be a nice tight band going around, but now with the reduction of the temperature differential between the Arctic and the temperate regions, it just wobbles all over the place.
Yep, it's like this.
Yeah,
Definitely is.
I went to upstate New York, and it was warmer than it had been in central Jersey the day before. It felt like November. Remember that day? It was
Which
with the
one?
wind. It was the day that with the wind chill, it felt like it was in the 20s. That was
Uh,
2 weeks ago. Well, maybe you missed that. No.
nah. Oh, I was probably in North Carolina. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If it was 2 weeks ago, that's where I was. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my thing. I sort of despair at the but this thing is a distraction. The Ukraine thing is a distraction from bigger issues. It's a
Yeah.
distraction that the Democrats are, going to be desperately milking to try and shift the focus away from, the economic difficulties, which I expect will be encountering over the next few months. So it's just an ugly scene.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you understand that. Like some people would say, with all the huge issues, critical issues going on, the Democrats would never. Uh,
Sorry, that made me
they
laugh.
will. They will.
They will. They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So uh, yeah, I think people are sort of seeing through it, like on the abortion thing. Where it wasn't like, oh man, let's go and remove the filibuster and pass the reproductive rights law. It was like, send us money.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah. And the White House, was reporting that the White House saw this as a galvanizing moment, to win those midterms. So yeah, we're basically governed by idiots. That's the problem.
We are.
Yeah. See, the pessimism is contagious.
Well, I like to say that I'm cynical, but I'm also still. There's always a little bit of optimism left under there. But yeah, it's really being tested. I'll tell you.
Yeah. Just wait till we get. If I think the Chinese are smart enough to get into it to try to stay out of the Taiwan war, but the United States might be stupid enough to try and push them into it. So
Yeah.
we'll have
Let's
to see
see.
what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's the. All right. I gotta leave maybe some. You sometimes. I mean, it looks like things are inevitable, but then something happens that you just never
A
would have expected.
catastrophe. Yeah.
Right. And the other way around. True. This is true.
Yeah.
But I have not given up hope. That's for sure. But yeah, it's looking really bad, and a lot of it is for what we just talked about in the bonus question. There's incentives and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
well, I should let you go, and let's talk again soon. And thank you so much for taking the time, Peter. It's always great to talk with you, and I really appreciate you taking your time on a Friday night at
Yeah.
that. So.
I could not think of a better way to spend my time. I'm glad
Thanks
to
so
come.
much.
Okay. Thanks, Joanne.
All right. Looking forward to it. Take care, Peter.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Peter Lee. Follow him on Twitter at ChinaHand and subscribe to his Patreon, Peter Lee's China Threat Report. This is a fully independent podcast. In the age of censorship, your support's more important than ever. You can go to the website aroundtheempire.com to find all the various ways that you can get access to bonus content and support the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave reviews. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire. Join us on Telegram, t.me/AroundTheEmpire. And we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody. Stay strong.